Well, thanks, Rob. I'm delighted to be joined by Leslie Caputo from Humu, based in New York, and from Gideon Pridor from Workvivo, based in Barcelona. We're going to discuss how we engage, retain, and motivate our people as workplace dynamics shift once more. But before we start, some brief introductions. Leslie is a solutions consultant and people scientist at Humu. An organizational psychologist, she spent her career working with large enterprises to solve difficult people challenges. Prior to joining Humu, she was Chief Customer Officer at Work are a company that focused on driving the adoption of hybrid work and managing the challenges therein. Gideon is Workvivo's interim CMO and chief storyteller. He has a track record of growing disruptive startups into global leaders that redefine their markets. Before Workvivo, Gideon was VP Marketing at Travel Perk and Perfecto, amongst many others. He's a frequent speaker at industry events, a HR tech enthusiast, and a startup mentor. So both are well positioned to provide us all with best insights and up-to-date advice today. So Leslie, if I can start with you, I know in Humu you use nudges. I love nudge theory. Before we get into it, have you seen any leaders or governments or chief medical officers or advisors use nudge theory effectively through the pandemic?
Absolutely. So here at Humu, we are an action management platform. So we help companies drive employee performance with personalized science-backed nudges in the flow of their day-to-day work. And for those who aren't familiar with nudge theory, as Frank just mentioned, it comes from the field of behavioral economics. Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize based on the concept of nudge theory. And really it has to do with making it easy for humans to follow through on the best of their intentions and do the right thing. So some of the examples in the pandemic that you might have seen of nudges in the wild, if you will, is anything from strategic positioning of sanitizers and masks in retail locations, all the way to things that drive the adoption of vaccines, for example. So you might have been targeted by commercials telling you, X percentage of people in your area have been vaccinated. That's called a social proof nudge. It's meant to help you understand what the majority is doing to incentivize you to try to conform with the majority to follow through in a particular action. So lots of examples of nudges in the wild around the pandemic. And Humu was founded by Laszlo Bock, who was the former HR chief of Google. And him and his co-founders, Wayne Crosby and Jesse Wisdom, did a lot of experimentation with nudges at Google, which really was the premise for why Humu was founded, was to bring nudges into the workplace for the first time.
Brilliant. I look forward to some of the insights you have. And
super
Gideon,
interesting.
It is indeed. And Gideon, when we spoke last week, you told me that we've seen so much change. Change was already happening fast. But with the pandemic, we rolled 10 years of change into 1 year. Where are we now?
Right now, we're at this interesting spot where I think the industry matured over like 10 years and in less than a year. So reluctantly, I think that almost every CEO in the world and us as managers, as leaders, as employees were sort of like pushed off a cliff and expected to build the airplane on the way down. So, we don't crash. Unprepared in terms of methodology, in terms of technology. A lot of things have changed. Some of these changes are starting to, roll back, people going back to the office, but a lot of them are here to stay. And we need to react in order to make this whole new reality, a new world order in a way, work. At Workvivo, we are an employee communication platform built around designed for building meaningful bonds and relationships between employees and themselves and employees and their companies, fostering companies' cultures, enabling to recognize fellow employees digitally. So that was a big deal before. Since the pandemic, for a lot of companies, this became from a nice to have, probably the most important challenge that they need to deal with right now in order to efficiently move from office first to digital without losing that super important thing, vibe, energy that we all used to have in an office environment. And this is what we're trying to help them with. So we live that every day. Interesting times.
Now, big time. And just before we get into, say, some of the solutions, one of the things we're seeing now is the great resignation, or I think it was the Great Awakening as well. Why are we seeing such a phenomenon?
I think it's not like unexpected. What it is very interesting. I think a lot would be still written about this. So it's called the Great Resignation, right? Like the Great Depression. Others call it the battle for retention, but it's all revolving around the same thing. And that's people suddenly not necessarily wanting to go back to work. They had the time for self-recognition and tasted a little bit of that flexibility, the ability to combine other things in their life, asking themselves questions that maybe before they didn't. So again, a process that would have taken a decade or two happened all of a sudden. And that's the phenomena that we're dealing with like now. A beautiful article that I read on the Huffington Post, like recently, they called it the Great Awakening, because it is sort of like psychologically an awakening of us looking at our lives and saying, okay, I'm not sure I want to go back there. Now, us as employers, we have a huge human challenge to not make that our disadvantage and lose our best people, or not being able to or not being able to hire them, but build our culture around that and cater to that, so we could make that an advantage and have these people want to come to work with us. And then the question we'll be talking about, I guess, in this session is, what are the pillars of that? What defines the new great places to work? What are these people, imagine, especially younger employees, looking for in order to, define a great place to work, a great employee experience for them? That, I think, is changing right now dramatically. The future of work became sort of the present of work. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about right now.
Brilliant. And just before we go on to that, if I could ask Leslie, is there any lessons in the last 18 months that we must never forget?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Gideon. I think we're just starting to learn more what's behind this Great Resignation. And I think a huge part of it also is the past 18 months, the work experience and the pandemic experience have been completely conflated, right? Because people have been at work while this has been happening. And so it's natural for humans to want and crave a change because they've conflated these two experiences. And so I completely agree. The challenges to culture are going to be immense. Particularly as you see a mass influx of new people into a culture, a mass departure of others. And so some of the things I think we need to keep from the last 18 months are the compassion that we showed our colleagues, the ability to really have a lens into their personal lives, getting to know people's personal challenges, childcare circumstances, the good, the bad, the ugly, really was a way for us to feel that greater sense of connection, even in this digital space. And I very much hope we won't go back to the very sterile professional shells that we used to have, because I don't think it suits us anymore. And I think it's harmful to company culture. I think the other thing that we need to make sure we do is to identify those people, especially when you're having mass departures, that are your culture carriers. Your leaders need to understand who those people are, because not only is there going to be a massive drain on knowledge and wisdom that's left when people depart, but also those people who know and embody the culture need to really step up as leaders to make sure that that's not lost. So we need to hold on to the people that preserve those cultural attributes as we see them.
Cultural carriers, is it?
Yes, culture carrier.
I think that's very well put. And Leslie just mentioned connection, meaningful connection. Yeah. I think that maybe the most meaningful thing, maybe I'm like stealing my own thunder from the takeaways, but it's about meaningful connections. And that's always been, look at any happiness research done in history. It always comes down to meaningful relationships, always. Now, we used to get a lot of that naturally in the workplace, the little in moments, seeing the CEO in the parking lot, getting a pat on the back for a job well done. A lot of it has disappeared. People, and I'm talking not about other people, but about me, suddenly became sort of Zoom zombies, right? Distilled to doing our job in front of a screen, forgetting to eat lunch more than ever before. Nobody says, hey, Gidi, you want to go out for lunch today? So a lot of the human experience got disrupted in a huge, significant way, a big way. Now, I believe, and we believe, this is our mantra, this is how we design our product, that everything else, perks, a free subscription to a gym, it's nice, but it's an Advil, it's a Band-Aid. The core is meaningful connections. And people need to feel that mutual sense of purpose, being included, being asked, being, being a part of something, belonging. And that was a problem before, but in the absence of the office, it became huge. And this is the reason, the core reason for a lot of the problems, anxiety, stuff that we talked about, fatigue, that is suddenly happening. So the holy grail is that sense of belonging, that meaningful connection that companies have to foster digitally without having an office-centric workplace. That's the challenge.
And getting that balance right as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
The balance. Leslie, you talk about the importance of close emotional distance. It's not just physical distance. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, I think this really underscores Gideon's points around connection quite a bit, which is that for the last 18 months, leaders have been so stressed about the physical distance between their employees. But what the research actually shows, what is far more impactful to team performance and team productivity is closing the emotional distance gap, which is exactly what Gideon is referring to. The feeling like you are connected to your colleagues, like that social fiber is there holding you all together, understanding what your teammates value, that you can trust. Trust is so key. Trust your teammates, especially in a virtual space, especially again with mass departures, mass new people coming in where that level of trust and connection isn't quite there. So needing to close that affinity distance or social distance is incredibly important, and where not enough leaders are spending their time right now. They're way too focused on this physical distance attribute. Here at Humu, we nudge employees based on the different behaviors they need to develop, but we also give them the chance to personalize where they want their nudges to focus. And we found that the #1 area that employees wanted to get nudged on during the pandemic was how to better build those social connections with their teammates.
Okay, very good. Well, that's interesting. And again, there's the whole emerging conversation around equity and democratization in a hybrid workforce. It's still in its infancy. Like, what extra steps should we take to engage remote workers? And should most of those steps be for all workers?
I think that is that for me?
Yeah, for the floor.
So I think that the philosophy, the manifesto, that we lead our product roadmap by is all about democratized open communications. We believe at Workvivo that the future of internal communications, that is the core of the employee experience, has to be open and democratized. And we think that everything got so forwarded over the past year and a half or so, that's the only way to go. I actually would go further and say that CEOs, leaders that just expect hybrid to just work are going to fail miserably. It's not going to just work. It's not going to just work. The way to make it work is to embrace new strategy for internal communications, melting down traditional communication barriers, involving people, including them, letting them respond, share. This is what our tool is designed for, so people could actually communicate with each other, not only top down like traditional tools, but 360, bi-directional. And a CEO, like modern age politicians, by the way, is able to, tweet to his entire team and get feedback back, less polished maybe, but fast in real time. Yeah. And that creates real social fiber, as I like that term that Leslie used before, real social fiber that could live digitally, but the only way to make it work is to democratize it in a way that actually creates engagement. Younger employees will not use tools because they have to. They will use tools because they want to. Intranets, that the adoption rate of intranet is below 10%. Nobody uses it. They don't want to. You can't make them too. What do? They use FaceTime. They use WhatsApp, shadow IT. By giving them that democratization, the ability to participate, you could find these ambassadors. Leslie had a better term before, social
culture carriers.
Culture carriers, yeah. You could find them naturally because they emerge, and that's so valuable. And B, people adopt it because they want it. and they like it. So you get natural adoption. So by giving your people more freedom, your company, your IT gets more control because they don't use other stuff that are not company tools. So more freedom actually equals more control. And we think the only way to make it work is to take that bold leap, cross the chasm, and embrace open democratized communications. Something that every company should think about, not only Silicon Valley tech companies, but any companies that takes engagement seriously.
So that's an interesting point you bring. So more freedom for employees equals more control for organizations. Leslie,
Definitely.
would you agree with that?
I do. And I think that there's been a lot of a knee-jerk reaction, particularly for some of the leaders who have felt sort of out of control with employees out of the office. And so you're seeing a lot of blanket policies of it's going to be 3 days in the office, 2 days out of the office, or it's going to look like this. And the reality is that the context is so much different for every employee, and even with every organization, and within every organization for every single team. So at Humu, for some of our customers, we've done analyses around what is that optimal window of in office versus out of office. And for one particular company, we found it was 2 days a week in office, 2 days a week work from home, the rest in the office. But again, that's going to look really, really different. And I think what the pandemic has done is it's helped employees be ruthless with what matters to them and how they want to spend their time. And so they're going to know if it makes absolutely no sense for them to go into an office to sit on calls with global colleagues for the rest of the day. Whereas if they have a meeting that would really benefit from in-person collaboration and idea exchange. And so I fully agree with Gideon that we need to find a way to set parameters, but also empower employees to make the decisions that are the best for their own productivity, for their own well-being. Because if companies just try to put these top-down blanket policies in place, their employees are just gonna leave. They already are, and they're just going to continue to leave.
Very good. So we need to look at it, turn it on its head, look at it from the bottom up.
Yeah.
We're touching on productivity there, right? And then there seems to be another COVID contradiction or COVID paradox that, many employees are working longer hours, and at the same time, one of the top worries for leaders is productivity. Now, how much of that is perception versus reality? And also, if it is just perception, how do we create and keep better work practices without creating extra work? Mm-hmm. So, let's start with you, Leslie.
Yeah, sure. Well, the research suggests that productivity per hour did drop over the last year, but that people worked more total hours to keep productivity up, right? And so, unsurprisingly, as a result, people are burnt out. We already know that. And so it's really not realistic for, as we plan this return to work, whether that's return to office or just return to work in a slightly more normal world than we have been, it's not realistic for managers to be aggressively focused on productivity, managing to KPIs, trying to hit the quarterly results. I think Laszlo, Humu's founder and CEO, said it wisely to me. He said, you don't take an athlete who was just injured and ask them to make their best time the next day, right? It's not going to happen. And if you put those aggressive performance standards on people as we reacclimate to work after all we've been through, they're just going to burn out and leave. Again, they already are. And so far more realistic is taking a collective pause, as difficult as I think that can be for leaders and managers right now, and focusing on something different, focusing on realigning employees to what matters for them, how they're connected to the mission of your company, why they belong at your company, working on closing that emotional distance gap. And if managers spend more of their time there, the productivity will come, but it is time better spent building that trust back up than immediately focused on productivity.
I want to build on what Leslie said, and maybe put it. Maybe that sounds a little bit too much, but people are not machines. People are not machines, and measuring productivity is also a very tricky thing. We read these researchers, we don't know exactly how they did that research. It's like the happiness researchers. How do they measure happiness, right? So read any CEO's story, biography. How did they create the best customer experience? It's always about the team. It's always about the culture. It's always about this, mojo that you have in your company that you can't really quantify and explain, these energies of people that love what they do, that go above and beyond. You feel it when you walk into the good companies. You feel it. You know, that's what big, good CEOs care about. A lot of that started to die, to get lost. People are more distant than ever before. And they're functionally doing their job, but being less connected to the purpose, to what they, to the company, to the culture, to the goals, then a lot of that less measurable energy, it gets lost. It gets lost. And any leader in any company would relate to that. We all know what I'm talking about. So by building that, taking these people that became a bunch of individuals working from someplace and making them a team again, that like each other, that work with each other, that have empathy towards each other, that work towards the same goal, that have each other's back, that are motivated, that know the company purpose, you know, they want to get to the next milestone. Then you get greatness, then you get innovation, then you get going above and beyond, and then you get performance that, you know, is off the charts, but that's probably not measured in productivity per hour. You have to create that, and you have to invest in that in order to create that, you know, greatness that great companies have. And that is the main and most dangerous thing that companies have been losing over the past 2 years.
Very good, and it's kind of, I suppose, a lot of leaders probably need a reality check, you know, and what I'm taking from you both there is it's very important that people are not aggressive in getting people back into the office or in being prescriptive, and that going forward we're going to need to be less rigid. The power balance has shifted back towards the employee. And something you just touched on earlier, Gideon, and I'd welcome Leslie's point on this as well, is that there seems to be a disconnect between, say, leadership in the corporate world and everybody else when it comes to the power of social, especially when it comes to communications. Why is that? Or are we reading that correctly? Am I listening to you? Am I hearing you right? There is that disconnect between sort of big corporates and understanding the power of social communications.
I think that it's very rapidly changing right now. I like to call it community rather than social. I think that by nature, smaller companies learn it faster. They're more agile than bigger companies. They're more nimble. But we have at Workvivo Fortune 500 companies that use Workvivo with 100, 100, and 200,000 employees. And they do get it, that if they try to apply sort of like a rigid top-down traditional communication scheme, it doesn't work. It ends up in a too polished newsletter that nobody reads. But if they make it community-led, like what we do at Workvivo, meaning you don't know where it will develop exactly, just like a social network. You discover these culture carriers. You didn't necessarily knew exactly who these people are before, but you give them the voice. You also have the limits. Not anybody can reply all to an email in a big company, right? So you have the permissions, the limits, admins, no admins, but in general, you invite people to participate and you create that open democratized culture that we talked about before. You put a tool in the middle and a methodology in order to create that community, regardless of an office. So you create a more equitable experience for people, whether they work from home, from the office, in between, or in the front line, in the field. And then you're on the verge of like creating something truly big. And social in this sense has a lot of power. Imagine like, I'll give you two small examples. Somebody just joined the company. They haven't seen anyone for a year, but they joined the company. It's the loneliest experience in the world. Now, forget us. Think about like somebody that it's their first job. They're like 22 and it's a psychological strain. They haven't seen anyone ever. So with Workvivo, for example, you have features for that. You see that person, you congratulate him. Everybody chimes in. You talk about stuff. You say welcome. You discover people with mutual skills or interests. You join spaces of stuff that you like, and you basically make friends, and you have that amazing welcoming experience. Or you have a button for kudos, which means I don't just like something. I could give Leslie a shout out for a job well done, and everybody from 60 different offices could join me and say good stuff. So people that get that now in a bigger way than they used to get it in like an office environment. So this is like the power of building a community and moving to digital. If you do it right, it's actually a historic opportunity to not only include the people that used to be included in an office, but to include the unincluded, the 70% of the employees that are frontline employees, the nurses, you know, the doctors, the miners, the people in the restaurant, in the coffee place, in the hotel, in the retail shop, that they used to just do their job, but they weren't a part of the office culture and all that. Suddenly it goes digital first. They could all have this and be included for the first time. So building that community technology-wise, which is what Workvivo does, and methodology-wise, is I think the biggest opportunity that organizations have now in the post-pandemic reality.
Oh, that's brilliant. And again, Leslie, I know in Humu, you talk about imprintable moments. Is that correct?
Yeah. Gideon just said, this is a historic moment. And here at Humu, we talk about or think about the return to work as an imprintable moment, right? So think about when a baby animal is first born and it looks like its mother and it imprints on its mother. It comes from a lot of the great work that our founders did at Google before they started Humu to find that there are these very few critical moments in an employee's experience at a company that have a lasting impact on them and that totally shape their experience of how do I conduct myself at this company? What's normal behavior at this company? And those are things like when you first onboard, imagine stories of, sitting there at a desk and looking around and no one's coming up to you and you don't have the right technology, right? Or when you first become a manager, this re-entry into work, return to the office is going to be another imprintable moment. And it represents a massive opportunity, but also tremendous consequences if companies get it wrong. So what we really say most companies need to focus on is decide what matters to you about your culture. What do you want to keep from the last year or year plus or decade? What do you want to fundamentally change in this new reality? Because now is the time to do it. You don't get fresh starts so often, right? And so how can you capitalize on that moment? You say inclusion is core to your culture. Is it really? If it's not, how are you going to make it in the new go forward reality? And then once you do that, how do you tell that story to your employees? Help them understand their role in being part of that positive momentum moving forward. And then how do you build it into everyday behaviors to scale that change? That's what Humu does, is we do that through nudges. And it's really similar to how Gideon's talking about this idea of community, right? We found, and I really should find a better word for this given the pandemic, but we found that there's a social contagion effect with the nudges where a lot of times companies will come and say, Gideon spoke about the shiny newsletter, right? Here's a list of behaviors we need our employees to do differently. And now we're going to go educate them on what that list of behaviors are. And so our philosophy is always forget that, just start doing. Let's just start nudging them and showing them how in advance of their next meeting, they can try this new thing to display more inclusive behaviors to their teammate. Or if collaboration is a focus area, here's a thing you can try in your next one-to-one with a direct report. And by doing, you can really start to reinforce those new behaviors that you want to see in this imprintable moment, which is, again, a pretty exciting opportunity, but a lot of pressure to get it right.
No, I kind of agree with you both. It is a reset moment and a great opportunity. And is it fair to say, well, this is my experience in recruitment, is we're seeing nearly unprecedented demand. We're seeing the great resignation out in the corporate world. And we're trying to say to our clients, look, we have to change, because if you don't change, others are changing, and you not only lose your staff, you may lose your market share, etc. Is that a fair comment, Gideon?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair comment. I think that you're not only competing first of all, talent is the most competitive aspect of modern age companies. You want to retain the best and you want to hire the best. You're not only competing with yourself, so you don't need to just be better than your competition. Say you're a bank, then you're just not just competing with the banks. You're competing with the new fintech apps, and for employees, you're competing with DoorDash or Deliveroo. Because they might find a job, the support agent might find a job there. So you're competing with everyone. And I said it in the beginning, and Leslie agreed as well, that there is a new definition. The important thing to understand is that employee expectations have dramatically changed. And as they get younger, this is becoming even more dramatical. It means that the definition of a great place to work has changed as well. The future of work, you know, that like overused term, it became the present of work.
Yeah.
And we need to figure it out in production, like right now. And yeah, so it's
an exciting time, and it's you got to evolve, or you're going to slowly fade away. Maybe
you have to evolve, or you're going to fade away. If you're not able to provide a culture of like recognition, of inclusion, if you're not able to give people that sense of belonging and that mutual, you know, sense of purpose, even if they don't go to the office every day, then they're going to prefer another company. They have a lot of places online to read experiences and understand that in this company, they have an amazing thing going on. Everyone that I interview today asks me questions that are completely different. If I compare it to like, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, it really changed in a big way. And that means that we need to build ourselves in order to provide that emotional connection, that bridge to that emotional connection, belonging, inclusion in our companies. That means technologically making the leap from office-centric to digital first. So everyone could have an equitable experience and be informed and be engaged and be connected to people and also to the company and its culture. And the methodology and the way we teach our own leaders and managers how to develop that inside their teams. Then people go and rave about it, and their friends come to work for you, and you want to stay even if you could get a little bit more money over there. That's the face of this generation, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. So we'll see less companies that lure people in because they have like a free massage and ping pong tables, and more companies that have unbelievable cultures and 5 out of 5 on Glassdoor, and people just want to be a part of that. And more companies where people feel a part of that amazing journey purpose, and they just want to go there even if they're getting paid less. So build yourself towards that. Emotional connection is the holy grail.
Yeah. And that's, again, I know you agree with that, Leslie. And do you think maybe one of the outcomes of the pandemic is that the veneer of, you know, as you said, the listed culture is gone. It's now the lived culture, which has been seen quite easily by employees, both existing and potential. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to build on what Gideon said, the other reality is the massive cost of losing this amount of talent, right? So it's obviously talent lost, which is huge productivity impacts, but also it just represents a massive cost to the business, which is something that companies should be working to prevent at all costs.
Okay, well, I'm getting the signal. We're nearly running over time. I need to have you back because I feel like we're only scratching the surface. So before we go, if I could ask you about, and I'll start with you, Leslie, if you've one key takeaway for our audience today, what is it?
Yeah, it would probably be that acknowledging that this is not easy work. What we're talking about here is behavioral change and really reprogramming how people behave and interact to adapt to these new realities. And no one program or workshop or newsletter or, you know, shiny poster on the wall can fix that. It requires continuous high touch connection points with your employees and leaders to build and reinforce those behaviors that will carry your company into the future. So companies need to radically rethink how they're engaging their employees today in order to best position themselves for that challenge.
Excellent. And again, don't be aggressive in returning to the office is a key one for you as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie. And Gideon, a final takeaway from you?
Yeah, my takeaway is be bold. This thing is not going to figure itself out. If you just like sit on the fence and see what's going on, there are going to be huge consequences in terms of resignation, productivity, fatigue, anxiety, stuff that we don't even know about and we didn't invent a term for it yet. But we will. And what we need to do is be proactive and be bold, crossing the chasm and changing our internal communication methodology from informing people, you know, top down to open, democratized communications, community-based, involving people, giving them a voice, even if you don't necessarily love what you hear. It's workable. But the holy grail is emotional connection, sense of belonging, And the main thing that you need to measure is employee engagement in this sense. If these metrics work, then you're on a path to something far greater than before. And that should be CEO-led. Both CEOs would prevail, and CEOs that just wait and see what happens are in for a big surprise.
No, listen, Leslie, Gideon, it's been fantastic. On behalf of Talent Summit, I'd like to thank you both. And for now, it's back over to you, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.